Tēnā koutou e te iwi nau mai, hoki mai. We hope that everybody enjoyed your lunch break after the incredible sessions this morning and are feeling ready to get back into the kaupapa for the rest of today. Just a reminder that our virtual platform holds lots of information about the sessions and speakers that we've heard from so far in this hui, and you will be able to access this content for another 30 days. Just an extra note around the chat function. For those of you that are wanting to chat, the Zoom chat function is disabled throughout the hui, so you will need to go back into the virtual homepage for this kaupapa. You will see a few options there on the homepage. You would have entered into this forum through the live function. Instead, you're going to go into the chat function. So you could go and open that now and have it ready, and feel free to use it throughout the rest of the afternoon, because we will be inviting questions for the panel this afternoon. Ka pai. So right now we are going to get into the final shift of Te Aorerekura. Shift 6 is towards increased capacity for healing. Joining us for this session are Leonie Pihama and Shirley Simmonds from He Waka Noa, Aroha mai, He Waka Eka Noa, and Erin Keenan, manager from Te Puni Kōkiri, to talk about Ngā Tini Whetu. We also have Darren Haimona, Deputy Chief Executive of Oranga Tamariki, and Dave Samuels, Chief Executive of Te Puni Kōkiri, listening in. They will offer some closing thoughts at the end of our speaker's presentation. Nō reira, Leonie, e te rangatira. Over to you to start us off.
Tēnā koutou, tuatahi mihi tēnei kia koutou e whakahaere ana I tēnei o ngā hui, I runga I te ipurangi, tēnā koutou. He mihi kawana tēnei kia koe marama, te minita mō au mahi kaha o mahi whakahirahira I roto I tēnei o ngā whare, nō reira e te tuahine tēnā koe. Kai hiahia matu ahau ki te mihi hoki ki Brad, tō te rewa mā, mō ngā whakamarama I whakatapato hia e rātou ina nahi e pāna ki tēnei āhuatanga o te ao Aorerekura, nō reira ki te whananga o Waikato Tainui tēnei te mihi atu. Ko ai tēnei I moi o koutou arawaro, ko tētahi mokopuna o te maunga titohia me te awa o Waikato, ko te atiawa, ko Waikato, ko ngā māhanga tairi, ara taranaki iwi tēnei I mihi kawana ki o koutou maunga, o koutou awa, o koutou iwi, o koutou moana, huri noa I te whare, tēnā koutou katoa. So kia ora, on behalf of the He Waka Eka Noa team, I just want to acknowledge, first of all, Marama, Minister Davidson, for your work in this field, and for everyone being a part of Te Aorerekura and developing the strategy. We've got a short period of time today, Shirley Simmonds and I, from the He Waka Eka Noa team, to share a little bit about the project that we're doing around cultural frameworks of family violence and understandings from a kaupapa Māori lens, but also the having work that we've been doing in the field. We want to spend today in this session around increased capacity to really focus on issues and notions of justice in terms of state violence. It's our view as a rōpū that the whole area looking at violence historical continues to be kind of under-discussed, and the conversation really needs to be increased. If we're going to talk about anything around increased capacity for healing, we have to talk about an increased capacity in an increased context of justice. So what we want to share today is the part of the quantitative survey that is related to that in particular, the impact of state violence. So I'm trying to share okay, for some reason I'm not able to share the screen. I think Shitala, you might have the So can I get the team to put our PowerPoint up? The first thing I want to talk about, while that's been done, is the whakatauki He Waka Eka Noa. And we chose this whakatauki in particular to talk about the collective responsibility of us all to be on this waka. And in this context, it's on this waka of Te Aorerekura and the strategy for moving forward. The whakatauki He Waka Eka Noa talks about a canoe that is used without restriction. And that comes from Matuahine Moko Mead's work. And when we're talking about a canoe that moves without restriction, what was from the context for all people to be engaged in, for all people to be on the waka. He Waka Eka Noa as a project has been developed through a kaupapa. Kia ora. I'll just get you to move the slide forward. He Waka Eka Noa as a project has been developed as a kaupapa Māori mixed methods research project. It's looking at prevalence of violence, and what we've chosen to do in this particular work is look at the varying levels of violence and acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of both in the cultural frameworks and factors that take in both whakawhiti kōrero interviews and quantitative survey that looks at levels of state violence, levels of community violence, levels of experience of violence collectively within whānau, and the experience of violence in terms of individuals, so individuals within whānau. If we could just move forward 2 slides. We have a next one. Thank you. We have our kaupapa Māori methodology, as you can see, that focuses on processes and understandings of tino rangatiratanga, whānau, kaupapa, kia piki i ngā raruraru i te kāinga, ako, taonga tuku iho, and ata as a principle of relationships. This is what has framed the approach to all of the work that we've done, and Shirley's going to share today. Move to the next slide. Shirley's going to share today as a part of the team, and you can see here it's quite an extensive team around the motu and a mixture of academics, researchers and practitioners, as well as having 2 advisors, of which many of you are familiar, He Waka Morgan and Professor Bonnie Duran, who comes out of the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute at the University of Washington in Seattle. Next slide. So what we want to do today is provide an overview of one component of the He Waka Eka Noa survey, which is looking at the impact of the state in regard to family violence for Māori. And I'll hand it to Shirley.
Kia ora, tēnā rā tātou katoa. He mihi nui kia koutou e hoi ana tēnei waka, ara ko te hauora o tātou iwi Māori, whānau Māori. He uri tēnei o te waka o tainui, ko raukua ki te kaukaroa pātitere te iwi, he uri poke no ngāpi. Nō reira, ko Shirley Simmonds, mihi ana kia koutou. Ngā mihi kia koe Leonie, thank you for that introduction to our research project here. If I could have the next slide, please. As part of our wider research project, we undertook a survey. This was conducted online, and despite it being conducted online, we gathered a number of participants, around about 1,600, which was a good result, and I think in itself demonstrated the need to have a voice in this space, for our whānau to have a voice in this space where we can talk about experiences of violence and methods for healing, in particular our tikanga processes for healing from violence. These, the next few slides we're going to share are around our questioning with regards to state violence. For the purpose of the survey, we took a wide view, a wide definition of violence in this respect. And you'll see in the next few slides, our questioning gives, reflects that definition. So for our definition of violence, we looked at state neglect, failure to protect, abuse and abuse of power, experiences of racism, breaches of te tiriti, and also police violence. Could I have the next slide, please? So one of our first questions in the survey is, in your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced neglect? One point to note here is that we asked both as an individual experience or that of the whānau, and the knowledge that what affects our whānau affects ourselves individually. So have you experienced neglect, such as denial of access to social services from state or government agencies? Click, please. Our results show approximately a third stated never, which means approximately 2/3 stated yes, they have experienced neglect, with around just over 20%, 21% stating they have had this experience a lot in their lifetime. Click, please. And the top 5 institutions that were indicated in terms of neglect were the health system, WINS, education, police, and the justice system. Next slide, please. Question number 2 in this section, in your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced a failure to protect by state or government agencies? Click, please. And again, just over a third stated never, just under 20% stated yes, they have experienced failure to protect a lot, and nearly half stated a few times in their lifetime. Click, please. And the institutions that were indicated here at the top there: police, health, justice system, education, and WINS. Next slide. Question number 3, in your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced abuse or abuse of power from state or government agencies? A lot, just over a fifth, approximately a half stated yes in their lifetime, they've experienced this a few times, and 28% stated never. The institutions indicated here were again police at the top, health, justice system, education, and oranga tamariki. Next slide, please. In your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced racism from the state or government agencies? Again, well, a bit lower even this time, 16.6% stated they've never experienced racism, whereas the majority stated they have experienced racism. Over a third stated they have had this experience a lot from agencies. The agencies indicated a little bit of a different lineup here in terms of which had the most frequency: the education system, health, police, WINS, and then followed by the justice system. Next slide, please. In your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced breaches of te tiriti or waitangi from the state or government agencies? Again, a number are stated a lot, just under 40% a few times, and around 17% stated never. Click, please. The institutions here are quite different from those in previous questions. So here, in terms of breaches of te tiriti or waitangi, those that came out as the top 5 most frequent: customs and immigration, district or regional council, Department of Conservation, and I think those 2 in particular indicate breaches with regards to our whenua, education and health. Next slide, please. In your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced police violence? This one was specific to police. Just under 9% stated yes, a lot, and 43% stated yes a few times, whereas just under half stated they had never experienced police violence. Following these questions, we asked an overall question. In general, how much does the state or system violence impact on your well-being? And just under 20% said not at all, whereas the majority stated yes, it did impact on their well-being. 32% approximately stated a lot, and just under half stated it impacted somewhat on an individual and whānau well-being. And the question following this was an open-ended question. It gave us some really interesting results. The question stated, are there things you do to try and minimise the impact of state violence in your life. One of the aims of our wider project is to look at solutions to violence. And as I mentioned, this generated some really interesting results. Click, please. We have roughly themed the results here. Firstly, one of the strategies to minimize impact of state violence is disengagement with services. A quote here, some of my whānau have given up applying for income support. Click, please. Another strategy, adherence to rules and laws, which I think indicates a sort of hypervigilance and a fear of breaking the rules and laws. A quote here, I keep my nose clean. Click, please. Another strategy is to educate oneself and one's whānau and equip yourself with the tools required for system navigation. A quote here, educate myself and my whānau on what we are entitled to. Advocacy, I take trustworthy people with me. That's in the context of engaging with systems. And self-advocacy, I exercise my rights, complaints letters. A number of people stated that they go out of their way to try and find out what their entitlements are and ensure that they receive what their entitlements are. Click. And a little bit more towards our own healing. A number of responses stated they sought their own healing, particularly with regards to entering into tikanga Māori and finding connection either with whānau, safe spaces, or with paiao. So some quotes here, I try to connect with my hapu, ka mau tonu au ki aku tikanga me toku reo, and karakia. And last click. An overall strategy is that of rangatiratanga, live on our whenua with our rules. So I think overall this section of our survey gives some indication of individual and whānau experiences of state violence, the institutions where it happens, and also gives some indication of where we can find solutions and where our whānau are finding our own solutions for healing. Kia ora, I think I hand it back to you at this point, Leonie.
Kia ora. Thank you, Shirley. So we really wanted to keep inside our time, and so we've just given the one section of the survey data, but as I said earlier, we have a range of layers in terms of whānau experience, in terms of racism, in terms of media, and in terms of prevalence for both for individuals witnessing and experiencing family violence that we will provide at a later date. But some of the things that have been very clear around in terms of the state violence discussion that came from kai kōrero, or those whānau that participated in giving their views, was that in terms of healing, seeking justice is a critical component. And a part of that is understanding the origins of violence as healing. And in previous research, He Waka Eka Noa, that was discussed as everyone having a right to know their backstory. So in terms of healing, an understanding of violence, an understanding of colonialism, an understanding of the intergenerational experience, an understanding of historical violence is critical for whānau, but also for anyone who is working alongside and supporting whānau. So you can see here, we can send this to the team to send out to you. We don't need to go through each of the quotes, but understanding origins of violence is healing. Next slide. Decolonization is healing. So when we're dealing at a state level and at a whānau and individual level, we're talking about a decolonizing process of coming to a pathway for well-being. So coming to understand the kinds of violence that have been experienced, to understand the intergenerational nature of that, to understand the impact of the removal of whenua, disposition from whenua, of land, in terms of reo, in terms of disconnection of whakapapa. All of these things are all critical in a healing pathway. So decolonizing as healing is a part of a move to justice And in seeking justice and receiving justice, we receive a form of healing in terms of state violence. Next slide. Te tiriti o Waitangi. This came through both the quantitative discussion that Shirley just gave in terms of the numbers of our people that have considered that there have been fundamental breaches and violence in relation to the non-honouring of Te tiriti o Waitangi, to the notion of disposition, in terms of when we looked at those particular organisations that came around Te tiriti o Waitangi, we do see that at a community level, particularly at a regional level, areas like District Council, Department of Conversation, those areas in terms of whenua have a significant impact in terms of violence. And therefore the honouring of Te tiriti o Waitangi, the enduring relationships that are required, the healing relationships that are required, the acknowledgement and affirmation of tangata whenua and tangata tiriti relationships, the acknowledgement of the role of the Crown and other organisations in the upholding of Te tiriti o Waitangi is a critical healing component when we are talking collectively for Māori in developing those forms of partnerships. And the provider organisations that we talked with also raise this as a critical issue in terms of having enduring, meaningful relationships that are Te tiriti o Waitangi based. Next slide. And we wanted to close off this session today around thinking around some critical ways of understanding the role of the state in terms of healing. And the role of the state has to be questioned. The role of the Crown has to be questioned. And the way in which Angela Davis talks about it is that she consistently has, over many years, raised the issue around racism, the issue around gender, the issue around class, the issues around homophobia that is embedded within state mechanisms. So if we're talking about a form of healing and justice in terms of state violence, we are talking about significant transformative required change systemically. And the last quote here is from, sorry, if you just go back, an earlier report that we did, He Waka Eka Noa, which I'm happy to share through the site. And what we talked about there is ko takoto te manuka, hikina te manuka. The challenge has been laid down. It's time for us to uplift and accept that challenge. And that is a requirement of all engaged in the area. And first and foremost, it is for us to for Māori to take control of not only the ways in which we understand violence, but also to construct the pathways of healing that are both individual and whānau, to make changes in all parts of society, to support the well-being of all whānau, to challenge ourselves, to challenge institutions, structures and government agencies to fulfil their obligations as laid out within Te tiriti o Waitangi. As Niwareka, in the story of Niwareka and Mataora, returned to her whānau for guidance and solace, so too must we provide whānau in societal contexts that are safe, secure and culturally grounded. That is what He Waka Eka Noa requires of us. That is what He Waka Eka Noa tells us in the whakatauki. It must be a collective movement. And it must be both tangata tiriti and tangata whenua led in a real Te tiriti o Waitangi relationship. Nō reira kia koutou, kia koe Shirley, te hoa mahi tēnā koe, kia koutou e whakarongo mai nā tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Tēnā Leonie, kōrua ko Shirley, ka nui te mihi kia kōrua nā Aorerekura. Thank you so much for sharing these incredible findings from your mahi. Ai kua takoto te manuka me hiki tātou I te manuka neha. So thank you so much. The challenge has been laid and it's time for us to accept that challenge. A big mihi to you for all the mahi that you both do in this area.